The Courtroom in Cedar Ridge, a quiet Midwestern town tucked between cornfields and long highways, carried the kind of silence that felt practiced. It was the silence of routine, of a place where people believed they already understood how things would end. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching dust in the air and casting pale lines across the wooden floor. The judge's bench stood firm and elevated, polished by decades of hands resting against it. Lawyers, clerks, defendants, all leaning forward in moments of hope or dread. On this morning, confidence filled the room more than tension. The prosecution shuffled papers with calm efficiency. The defense sat straighter than usual, aware the odds were not in their favor. Jurors watched attentively, some leaning forward, others clasping their hands as if bracing for nothing more than confirmation of what they already believed. This was supposed to be a clean case, organized, logical, nearly finished. At the front of the courtroom, beside the witness stand, lay the police dog. The German Shepherd was large, muscular, and perfectly still. Its coat was glossy, black and tan, groomed to regulation standards. A short leash rested loosely in the handler's hand, more symbolic than necessary. The dog did not pull, did not shift, did not fidget. Its dark eyes scanned the room with quiet alertness, trained to observe without reacting. This dog had been through far louder rooms, far more dangerous situations. A courtroom was nothing. To most people in the room, the dog represented professionalism, discipline, trust. It had a name, a badge number, and a service record thicker than most files on the clerk's desk. The handler, Officer Daniel Reeves, sat with the posture of a man accustomed to respect. He had worked with the dog for 6 years. Together, they had searched collapsed buildings, tracked suspects through rain-soaked woods, and stood watch during tense standoffs. The department praised the dog as exceptional, reliable, nearly flawless. That reputation echoed silently through the courtroom. Near the back, on one of the hard wooden benches, sat someone no one was watching. The little girl's feet did not reach the floor. They swung slightly, back and forth, brushing the air in a slow, uneven rhythm. She wore a pale yellow dress and shoes that were slightly scuffed at the toes. In her lap rested a stuffed rabbit, its fur worn thin and one button eye hanging loosely by thread. She clutched it tightly, fingers curled around its soft body as if afraid it might disappear. Her name was Lily. At 3 years old, Lily did not understand courtrooms. She did not know why the adults spoke in careful voices or why everyone seemed so serious. She only knew she had been brought somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere that smelled like wood, paper, and something sharp she could not name. She sat beside her aunt, who whispered reassurances and smoothed her hair whenever Lily shifted too much. "Just sit still," her aunt murmured softly. "It'll be over soon." Lily nodded, though she did not know what over meant. From the moment they entered the room, Lily had noticed the dog. At first it was just curiosity. The dog was big, bigger than any dog she had seen up close, bigger than the neighbor's Labrador, bigger than the cartoon dogs she watched on television. She watched how it lay so still, how it barely blinked. It didn't pant. It didn't wag its tail. It didn't look friendly the way dogs were supposed to look. As minutes passed, curiosity turned into something else. Lily's grip on the stuffed rabbit tightened. Her legs stopped swinging. Her body leaned slightly backward against the bench, as if distance might protect her. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dog, even when her aunt tried to point out the colorful seal above the judge's bench or whisper stories to distract her. The dog shifted its head slightly. Lily's breath caught. A faint sound escaped her throat, not a cry, not a word, just a small, startled inhale. She pressed the rabbit against her chest. Her heart began to beat faster, though she could not explain why. She did not remember images or sounds. What she remembered lived deeper in her body, in the tightness of her chest, in the way her stomach twisted. At the front of the room, Officer Reeves spoke confidently as he prepared to testify. He described training hours, certification programs, sent discrimination tests. He spoke of the night of the incident, how the dog had led officers to crucial locations, how it had remained calm and focused despite chaos. His voice carried certainty, experience. The jurors listened, several nodded. The judge took notes. The dog lay quietly at his feet, the perfect picture of obedience. Lily squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. When she opened them again, the dog was looking directly at her. The eye contact lasted no more than a second, maybe less, but it was enough. Lily's shoulders jerked. Her feet pulled up onto the bench. Her breathing quickened. The rabbit slipped slightly from her grasp, and she scrambled to hold it tighter, as if it were the only solid thing in the room. Her aunt leaned closer. Hey, she whispered. It's okay, it's just a dog. But Lily did not answer. Her small face had gone pale. Her lips trembled. She did not cry, not yet. She simply stared, frozen, as if her body had decided something her mind could not argue with. At the front, the dog broke eye contact and returned its gaze forward, resuming its trained stillness. To anyone watching, nothing unusual had happened. The handler did not notice. The attorneys did not pause. The courtroom continued, wrapped in its sense of order and control. But something had already shifted. Lily's foot brushed the floor as she adjusted her position, and the sound echoed too loudly in her ears. Her chest felt tight. Her throat burned. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and uneven, pounding louder than the voices around her. She did not know why she was afraid. She only knew that she was. And she knew one other thing, though she could not yet put it into words. The dog was wrong. The courtroom remained unaware, moving steadily toward what everyone assumed would be a predictable conclusion. Papers turned. Voices rose and fell. Time marched forward. All the while, a 3-year-old girl sat silently on a wooden bench, holding a frayed stuffed rabbit, carrying a truth no one had thought to ask her for. And the room, full of certainty, had no idea it was about to come to a complete stop. The courtroom settled into the rhythm of testimony, a rhythm that should have been predictable. Officer Daniel Reeves stood near the witness stand, his posture taut but confident. Beside him, the German shepherd remained calm, obedient, a picture of precision and discipline. To anyone watching, the dog was the embodiment of reliability. Trained, controlled, professional. Every word Reeves spoke seemed to reinforce that idea. The dog had been involved in tracking the suspect in a dangerous case months ago, and now its role was considered indisputable evidence. Every officer, lawyer, and juror nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Its reputation was flawless, beyond reproach. Reeves spoke in deliberate tones, explaining the dog's training. He detailed the countless hours of obedience drills, scent tracking, and simulation exercises the dog had endured. He explained how it could locate hidden objects, follow scents over miles, and respond to commands with near-perfect precision. To the courtroom, this wasn't just a dog. It was a partner in law enforcement, a trusted tool in the pursuit of justice. Each step of the investigation that relied on the dog seemed validated, unshakable. The jurors leaned forward, fascinated. Some took notes, others whispered quietly to themselves. The defense attorney scribbled down observations, no doubt strategizing how to challenge the testimony, though at this point the evidence seemed nearly airtight. The judge, ever composed, listened with a careful eye, occasionally glancing at the dog to ensure it remained still. Its reputation alone carried weight in the room. Everyone felt certain. Everyone believed. Except for one small figure in the back of the courtroom. Lily's hands remained wrapped tightly around her stuffed rabbit. Her tiny knuckles were white, pressing into the soft fabric as if holding on could protect her from an invisible threat. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, followed the dog with a focus that seemed unnatural for her age. The rabbit rested against her chest, but her arms trembled slightly. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and uneven. She did not move, did not speak, did not blink. She simply stared. To her aunt sitting beside her, Lily's behavior was perplexing. "Sweetheart," she whispered softly, leaning close, "it's just a dog. You've seen dogs before, it's okay." Her voice was warm, comforting, gentle, but Lily did not respond. She did not nod. She did not relax. Her little body stiffened even more, her legs pressed together on the bench. The rabbit was now pressed under her chin as if it could shield her from whatever she felt but could not name. The dog, of course, remained oblivious. It was trained to follow commands, not react to children or emotional cues. But Lily's gaze never wavered. Each slight shift of the dog's head, each flicker of its ears seemed magnified in her perception. In the silence of the courtroom, every subtle movement became a signal, every quiet breath a warning. Her young mind, sensitive in ways adults could not perceive, was cataloging details others dismissed. She remembered in fragments a moment from months ago, shadows, noises, and a fear so immediate it had burrowed into her small body. She could not name it, could not explain it. All she knew was that the dog reminded her. Reeves continued his testimony, unaware of the tension building in the gallery. He described a night when the dog had tracked a suspect through rain-slicked alleys, over fences, into the dense woods outside town. Every move the dog made had been recorded, noted, analyzed. Its performance had led officers to key evidence and ultimately helped secure arrests. Photographs, maps, reports, all corroborated its actions. To the courtroom, this was irrefutable. To Lily, it was something else entirely. Her memory flickered. She saw glimpses of the incident, shapes moving in the dark, voices shouting, the smell of smoke, the sudden rush of cold air. She had hidden, trembling, clutching the same rabbit she held now while chaos swirled around her. And she remembered the dog. It had been there too, watching, moving, unseen by adults but aware. A presence she could not name but that her body never forgot. Her chest rose and fell faster. She tried to adjust her position on the bench, but her legs were too short and the floor was far below. Her aunt reached over and brushed her hair back gently. "It's okay," she whispered again. "You're safe." But Lily could not feel safe, not while the dog remained in the room. The reassurance of her aunt's voice barely registered. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stayed locked on the German shepherd. The courtroom, absorbed in the details of testimony, noticed nothing unusual. Lawyers whispered to their assistants. Officers sat straighter. The judge jotted notes on his pad. The dog shifted slightly but remained perfectly still. From the outside, the scene looked calm, orderly, procedural. But the undercurrent of fear that Lily carried was real, tangible, and growing. Then came a subtle change, imperceptible to everyone but Lily. The dog's ears twitched just barely. Its head tilted fractionally, and for the briefest moment its gaze lingered on her. She froze. The rabbit slipped slightly from her arms and her tiny hands shot out to catch it. Her body stiffened. Her breath caught. The room remained oblivious, but something had passed between child and dog, a silent communication that neither fully understood. The dog, trained to read commands and threats, had detected a subtle shift. Lily, overwhelmed by memory and instinct, reacted without knowing why. Her fear was unformed, yet undeniable. Her aunt whispered again, a hint of worry in her voice. "Sweetheart, it's just a dog," but Lily could not answer. She could not explain. The memory, the echo of that night, was rising from somewhere deep in her mind. It was a memory without words, a sensation that had settled into her muscles, her chest, her stomach. She only knew it was wrong, and she could not look away. Reeves described the dog's training in further detail, speaking of its keen senses, its obedience under stress, and its remarkable ability to detect subtle scents. The courtroom absorbed every word. They saw nothing threatening. They understood nothing. Lily, however, was living it. Every sentence reminded her body of the danger she had felt. She pressed the rabbit closer to her face, biting down slightly on its soft ear, trying to anchor herself. She did not understand why she was terrified. She only knew she was. Minutes passed. Reeves moved to recount the dog's part in the night of the incident. He described how it had navigated obstacles, ignored distractions, and led officers with unerring precision. Jurors nodded. The judge wrote notes. Lawyers whispered quietly. The courtroom remained convinced of the dog's innocence, of its loyalty, its discipline, its value as an instrument of justice. Lily, meanwhile, was shrinking into herself. Her eyes darted around, then back to the dog. Every small movement it made felt magnified. Every breath it took seemed louder than the judge's gavel. She rocked slightly on the bench, her small hands gripping the rabbit as if it were a lifeline. The memory surged stronger, but she had no words, no voice, no way to explain why her body felt as if it were standing in the middle of a storm. Her aunt tried again, brushing the hair from her eyes. "Honey, honey, it's okay," she whispered. "Look at me." Lily could not. She could not tear her eyes from the dog. Something primal, ancient even, had locked her attention. Her mind could not reason. Her body could not forget. She was caught in a place between memory and instinct, too young to articulate, too aware to ignore. The courtroom continued as usual. Adults reassured themselves that this was a normal day. Evidence was being presented. Testimony was being heard. The dog lay obedient, silent, professional. Everything was under control. The jurors believed in the reliability of the evidence. The lawyers believed in the rules. The judge believed in the law. But Lily's world had changed. She did not yet speak. She did not yet cry. She simply watched, aware of danger no one else could see. The courtroom remained unaware of the tension building at the edges of order, tension that would erupt in a moment so sudden that it would freeze everyone in place. The quiet certainty that had filled the room since the start of the hearing had begun to crack, and a single, tiny presence, 3 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit, would be the first to notice. It was only a matter of time. The courtroom hummed with quiet activity. Papers shuffled. Lawyers whispered in hushed tones. The judge's pen scratched across the pad as he made notes on the latest testimony. The officers present leaned forward slightly, eyes alert, ears listening to every word that could strengthen their case. The dog lay perfectly still, a symbol of discipline and control. Every detail in the room suggested normalcy. To anyone present, it was just another day in court, a procedural step in a case everyone thought they understood. But in the back, a 3-year-old girl was quietly unraveling. Lily's small hands gripped the edges of the wooden bench until her knuckles turned white. Her stuffed rabbit, worn and frayed, was pressed to her chest like a talisman. Her wide eyes, unnaturally steady for her age, were locked on the police dog at the front of the room. Every subtle movement, the tilt of the head, the twitch of an ear, the faint exhale of breath, sent her body into tense alertness. Her breathing had grown shallow. She wasn't just nervous. She was recalling something she could barely name, a memory encoded not in words but in muscle memory, in instinct. The memory had no timeline, no clear shape, just a presence, a shadow, and the dog, trained, calm, disciplined, was now the embodiment of that shadow. Her aunt, seated beside her, noticed the stiff posture, the unblinking gaze. "Sweetheart, honey, it's okay," she whispered softly, her voice warm but tentative. "You're safe here. Really, you are." She reached out a small hand to brush Lily's hair back. Lily recoiled slightly, shrinking back into the corner of the bench as if her aunt's presence could not reach the memory that gripped her. The courtroom continued around her. Officer Reeves elaborated on the dog's role in the investigation. He described, in meticulous detail, how the dog had tracked scents across open fields, navigated obstacles, and alerted officers to the presence of hidden evidence. Jurors nodded approvingly. Some jotted down notes. The defense attorney muttered quietly to an assistant, already considering how to challenge the testimony. The judge's pen never stopped moving, a constant rhythm signaling control and order. But Lily could not focus on words. She could not focus on the logic, the evidence, the reason. Her mind and body were caught in the memory of months before, the night of the incident. She remembered shadows flickering across walls, voices raised in urgency, the cold rush of air as someone ran past her hiding spot. She remembered the dog, not friendly, not comforting, watching, present, silent, unyielding. Every shift of the German shepherd in the courtroom now mirrored that past moment. Even a slight head turn, a twitch of an ear, a glance from dark eyes, sent ripples of tension through her small body. She hugged the rabbit closer, pressing it against her chin, biting the edge of the soft fabric as if the action could anchor her to the present. but it did not. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, a frantic rhythm that made every other sound, the judge's pen, the shuffle of papers, the whisper of lawyers, fade into the background. Minutes passed. Her aunt tried again, leaning closer, speaking softly. "Look at me, honey. It's just a dog. Look at me. It's okay." Lily could not. She could not tear her gaze from the German shepherd. Her small body remained rigid, muscles tense as though bracing for some unseen danger. The rabbit, held tightly against her chest, became her shield. The dog, for its part, remained calm. Trained to observe but not react, it lay on the floor, eyes scanning the courtroom. Yet somehow it had sensed her unease. Its head tilted fractionally, a micro-movement almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Lily it was magnified. Her stomach twisted, her chest constricted. She hugged the rabbit harder. The world around her, the judge, the lawyers, the officers, the jurors, did not see what she saw, did not feel what she felt. But her body remembered. And then the first tremor of action passed through her. She shifted slightly on the bench, her small feet dangling far above the floor. The rabbit slipped just a little, and she reached reflexively to hold it closer. Her fingers brushed against the worn fur, and she bit down on the edge, trying to ground herself. Her chest rose and fell quickly, unevenly. She could not explain why she felt fear, why her stomach was tight and her legs stiff, why her hands shook despite the warmth of her aunt's presence. The memory, fragmentary but vivid, surged forward. She could see the night again, the dim light of street lamps through the trees, the frantic movements of shadows, the smell of smoke and cold air, the rush of her hiding spot as she clutched her rabbit. And the dog had been there too, watching, a silent observer in that chaos, a presence that was both protector and threat in her mind, impossible to separate. Her aunt's gentle whispers could not reach her. The words of adults around her, of Officer Reeves, of lawyers, of the judge, were drowned out by her memory, by instinct, by the raw, unprocessed fear her body had stored. Lily's body was communicating what her mind could not: danger, alert, attention, watch. The courtroom remained oblivious, papers shuffled, eyes scanned documents. The jurors leaned forward, following testimony. The dog, still and composed, remained the symbol of law, order, and justice. To everyone else, nothing had changed. But something had shifted. Lily's small body was on the edge of breaking that invisible boundary of normalcy. Her hands gripped the rabbit until her knuckles were white. Her feet twitched. Her breath quickened. And as her eyes tracked the dog, she began to rock slightly back and forth on the bench, a barely perceptible movement, signaling the beginning of a reaction that would soon make the room freeze. The tension built invisibly, a storm forming in the smallest figure in the room. One by one, unnoticed, jurors, officers, and the judge continued their work, unknowingly approaching a moment that would challenge every assumption in the room. They were confident, certain, comfortable in their belief that the dog was a tool of law, reliable and disciplined. But Lily's body remembered what reason could not acknowledge. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her lips trembled. She pressed the rabbit harder against her face. And then, for a moment, her eyes widened even further. She stiffened entirely. Something in the dog's stance, a subtle shift in its posture, mirrored a memory her young mind could not articulate. She was no longer a passive observer. Something inside her was about to speak, a warning without words, a signal so simple yet so powerful it would stop everyone in the room cold. The adults remained unaware. The dog remained calm. The judge scratched notes. The lawyers whispered. The officers nodded. And the 3-year-old girl, clutching a tattered rabbit, was preparing to shatter the illusion of certainty with the smallest voice in the courtroom. The courtroom was still, almost unnaturally so, as Officer Reeves continued describing the dog's precision during the investigation. Every movement the dog made seemed calculated, deliberate, professional, an embodiment of the law itself. The jurors nodded, the judge scribbled notes, and the lawyers whispered quietly to each other about procedural strategy. Everything was orderly, everything was predictable. Except for Lily. She shifted slightly on the bench, her tiny fingers clutching the stuffed rabbit so tightly it squeaked faintly under her grip. Her small body trembled with tension she could not control, a tension that had been building for minutes, then hours, since she had first stepped into the courtroom. The dog remained calm, yet somehow, even its stillness amplified her unease. Every breath it took, every slight twitch of its ears, every subtle glance from its dark, intelligent eyes, each became magnified in her perception. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her stomach knotted. Her heart pounded loudly enough that she thought the people around her might hear it. Her aunt leaned closer again, trying one last time to soothe her. "Honey, it's okay. Look at me, sweetie. The dog won't hurt you." But Lily could not look. She could not speak. Her small mind was trapped between memory and instinct, between fear and the need to protect herself. She pressed the rabbit harder against her chest, biting down on its soft fabric. The world around her, the judge, the lawyers, the officers, the jurors, faded into background noise. There was only the dog and the shadow of something she remembered but could not yet name. Then it happened. A subtle shift ran through her. Her body stiffened completely. Her little legs dangled, feet brushing the floor. She rose slightly on the bench, almost imperceptibly at first. Her small hand shot out, trembling, and pointed directly at the German shepherd. The courtroom, absorbed in testimony, noticed nothing, but Lily's movement was deliberate, clear, focused. Her lips parted. Her voice, small but unwavering, cut through the room like a bell. "Bad dog." The words were two simple syllables, almost too quiet to catch at first, but the effect was instantaneous. Time itself seemed to pause. The pen in the judge's hand froze mid-scratch. Lawyers halted mid-note. Jurors blinked, confused. The officer at the front instinctively tightened his grip on the leash. The dog, trained to be calm in chaos, paused and looked directly at her. A ripple ran through the room, subtle at first, then undeniable. Murmurs started, whispers spreading like wildfire through the courtroom. People turned their heads. Eyes widened. The judge's brow furrowed. He set down his pen and leaned forward, scanning the room. The orderly rhythm of the courtroom shattered in an instant. Lily, however, did not stop. She remained standing, pointing, repeating the words with a mix of fear and certainty. "Bad dog," she said again, this time louder, trembling but clear. Her tiny voice, carrying the weight of instinct and memory, filled the room in a way no adult testimony could. She did not cry, yet, but her small body quivered as if the two words carried the power to undo all the certainty that had existed for hours. The officer's hand trembled on the leash. He knelt slightly to calm the dog, whispering commands under his breath. The German shepherd tilted its head, ears back slightly, eyes locked on the child. It had seen countless dangerous situations, yet it seemed to sense the intensity of her fear. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of attention and caution. The jurors stared in stunned silence, some clutching their notebooks, unsure of how to react. The defense attorney opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Even the judge, who had seen years of chaos in courtrooms, felt a pang of uncertainty. He motioned for silence, but the tension in the air made it impossible to restore order. The words "bad dog" echoed louder in his mind than any formal testimony he had ever heard. The room, full of adults trained to trust procedure, evidence, and logic, suddenly understood the fragility of certainty. It was not in the law that the room froze, not in the witness, not in the facts. They froze because of the raw, unfiltered truth spoken by the smallest voice in the room. Her aunt rushed to her side, trying to pull her down from the bench. "Honey, come sit, it's okay," she urged, but Lily resisted. Her tiny hands gripped the rabbit, pointed straight at the dog, and her eyes, wide with fear, refused to leave its gaze. She was not acting out. She was communicating in the only way she could, a warning that no one else had recognized until that moment. The judge called for a recess, his voice steady but heavy with unease. "We'll pause for a moment," he said, his tone deliberate, trying to regain control of the room. Officers shifted, lawyers muttered, jurors fidgeted. The dog's handler knelt, adjusting the leash, keeping the animal close, yet somehow, even in its obedience, the dog's presence felt less controlled now. Lily continued to stand, her voice small but unyielding, repeating the words intermittently. Bad dog, bad dog. Each repetition made the courtroom more uncomfortable. The murmurs rose. People glanced around at one another, unsure what to do. What had seemed ordinary, safe, and predictable was no longer so. The quiet authority of the courtroom had been interrupted by the raw instinct of a 3-year-old child. In the hall outside, staff whispered. Court officers exchanged glances. The story of the day, of the evidence of the dog's past actions, all seemed less certain now. The child's words had rewritten the moment. Something unspoken, something invisible had been exposed. Even the dog, trained for years to detect scents, follow commands, and navigate chaos, seemed to pause in recognition. It had never hesitated before, never questioned authority. But the girl's words, her tone, her intensity, it made the room, and perhaps even the dog, reconsider. Lily finally sank to the bench after repeating the words one last time, sobs beginning to break through her composure. The rabbit was still clutched tightly, her face buried in it. Her aunt pulled her close, stroking her hair, whispering reassurances. It's okay, baby. It's okay now. You're safe. The courtroom remained frozen, the tension thick and palpable. Every adult there, from juror to judge to officer, felt it. A sudden, undeniable shift in the room's energy. The rules of procedure and the assumptions about the dog's behavior no longer mattered. All that mattered was the small child who had just revealed a truth in 2 words, a truth so simple, so instinctual, that it stopped everyone cold. Somewhere deep in the memory of that child, the night of the incident stirred again. She remembered shadows, movement, fear, and now she had voiced it. Her voice, small as it was, carried a weight no adult had expected, no officer had predicted, no juror had imagined. And in that pause, in that frozen moment, the courtroom realized a startling truth. Sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. The judge tapped his gavel gently, signaling a recess, but the sound seemed hollow against the weight of what had just happened. Officers led the dog quietly out of the room, while murmurs spread among the jurors and attorneys. The room emptied slightly, but the silence that replaced it was heavy, thick with thought and realization. Even after the gavel fell, even after the dog was gone, the words "bad dog" echoed in the minds of everyone who had been there. They would not soon forget them. And Lily, small, trembling, clutching her rabbit, had changed the course of the courtroom forever. The courtroom, once a place of predictable procedure and controlled authority, had transformed into something unrecognizable. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, pen paused above the notepad. He had seen cases twist unexpectedly, witnesses falter under pressure, and arguments fall apart in dramatic fashion. But nothing prepared him for the sight of a 3-year-old girl, small and trembling, pointing at a trained police dog and uttering 2 simple words that stopped everyone in the room. Bad dog. The jurors, who had been diligently following testimony, now exchanged confused glances. Their notes lay forgotten on laps as they whispered among themselves, unsure whether the child's words were a result of imagination, fear, or something more urgent. Some tried to rationalize it, assuming that children said strange things under stress, that imagination filled gaps adults didn't understand. Others, older jurors with grandchildren of their own, felt an instinctive chill, an unshakable certainty that something unseen was being communicated. Officer Reeves knelt near the dog, whispering soft commands under his breath. The German shepherd, trained for years to follow orders, maintained composure, yet there was a subtle change. Its ears flicked slightly, eyes tracking Lily with more intensity than before. He tightened his hold on the leash, realizing this was no ordinary courtroom disturbance. The dog was alert, not to a threat from anyone else, but in response to the child's reaction. It had sensed tension she could not articulate, a warning encoded in instinct and body language, something invisible to everyone but the smallest witness in the room. Lily's aunt tried to calm her, but her words barely reached the child. "Sweetheart, honey, you're safe now. Look at me," she urged, voice gentle but urgent. Lily could not respond. She was not crying loudly, but quiet sobs trembled through her body. Her tiny hands gripped the rabbit with white-knuckled intensity, her feet dangling, unable to reach the floor. Every breath she took seemed synchronized with the rhythm of her pounding heart, which in her perception echoed louder than the voices around her. The judge called for order, but the sound of his gavel did little to restore calm. The room had shifted into a collective uncertainty. Adults trained to rely on procedure, on law, on reason, felt the weight of instinct, and instinct had come from a 3-year-old. Papers lay scattered on benches as whispers rose, murmurs rippling across the courtroom. Lawyers muttered quietly to their assistants, debating whether to pause, to challenge, to question the validity of this unexpected interruption. But nothing in law prepared them for what they had just witnessed. One of the jurors, an older woman with keen eyes, whispered to her neighbor, "She's telling the truth. You can see it in her eyes." The neighbor shook her head, uneasy. "It's a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying." But even as she spoke, a knot formed in her stomach. There was something undeniable in the child's fear, a truth raw and instinctive that no adult explanation could erase. Outside the formal proceedings, court staff whispered, exchanging worried looks. Someone brought a chair for Lily, gently guiding her back down from the bench, but she resisted, clinging to her rabbit and pointing faintly toward the front. Her small voice, now muffled by sobs, continued repeating the 2 words intermittently. "Bad dog, bad dog." Each repetition carried a weight, a warning, an insistence that could not be dismissed. Even Officer Reeves, trained in decades of law enforcement and crisis management, felt a twinge of unease. He had been through dangerous situations, seen suspects flee, witnessed chaos erupt in controlled environments, but nothing compared to the raw certainty emanating from the smallest witness. The dog responded subtly, muscles tightening, head lifting slightly, ears flicking as if it, too, sensed the significance of what was happening. The judge, a man accustomed to controlling the flow of court proceedings, realized he needed more than procedure to manage this. He called a brief recess. "All right," he said, his voice measured but heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. "We'll pause for a moment." Murmurs spread through the courtroom as people tried to make sense of the situation. Lawyers and officers stepped aside, discussing quietly, but all agreed on one point. The child's reaction had disrupted the assumptions of the day. During the recess, a child specialist was brought in. She knelt near Lily, speaking softly, coaxing the child to relax while gathering insight. Lily's sobs subsided slightly, but her gaze remained fixed, wary. She could not explain the fear she felt. She could only show it. The specialist, experienced with trauma in young children, recognized the signs immediately. Heightened awareness, physical tension, and responses tied to memory rather than conscious thought. Lily's body remembered what her mind could not yet express. The specialist whispered to the judge and lawyers, "Children often encode fear physically. Even without words, their reactions can reveal truths adults overlook. Her fear isn't imagined, it's real, tied to something she witnessed or experienced. You should consider this seriously." Back in the courtroom, discussions escalated quietly. The defense attorney suggested additional testimony or examination of procedures, unsure how to integrate this new dynamic. The prosecution debated whether to leave the dog in the courtroom, nodding that it had been trained for controlled environments. But all parties felt the unease. The courtroom was no longer neutral. Something invisible had shifted, something neither legal precedent nor procedural rigor could fully address. As the tension built, Lily's sobs grew softer, more deliberate. She clutched the rabbit, pressed it to her chest, and for a moment the fear subsided into watchful observation. Her body remained alert. Every subtle movement of the dog, every glance of the officers, every whisper from adults, registered with her instinctive memory. She was waiting. She was responding. She was communicating in ways the adults around her could not yet comprehend. The jurors, too, were unsettled. Some whispered questions, quietly analyzing what had just occurred. They were adults trained in reason, yet reason felt inadequate. How could a child, barely 3, perceive a threat that all trained professionals had overlooked? How could her instinct, her fear, hold authority over the law itself? For the first time, they questioned not only the case but the evidence, the interpretation, and even their own assumptions. Outside, the murmurs of courthouse staff added another layer of tension. People exchanged stories of similar experiences, children who remembered more than they were thought to, small voices that revealed truths hidden from adult eyes. The narrative of the day, once predictable, now unraveled. The courtroom's authority felt fragile, almost provisional, subject to the instinct of one small girl. When the recess ended, the courtroom reconvened. The dog was temporarily removed at the judge's direction, placed in a secure area outside. Lily's sobs had faded further, but she remained alert, scanning the front of the room as if waiting for something more to occur. Officers and lawyers returned to their positions, but the atmosphere had shifted. The orderly rhythm of testimony was gone. It had been replaced by doubt, hesitation, and the recognition that the smallest voice could alter the trajectory of events. The judge, leaning forward on his bench, addressed the room. "We will proceed carefully," he said, voice calm but firm. "Some testimony will be revisited. Certain evidence may need clarification. We are here to seek the truth." His words carried authority, but even he knew that truth now had a dimension no law or procedure could fully control, a dimension shaped by the instinctive perception of a child who had spoken 2 words: "Bad dog." Lily's aunt moved closer, still holding her hand. "Honey, you did okay," she whispered, brushing hair from the child's eyes. Lily's small nod was tentative, her attention still drawn to the empty space where the dog had been. Her body, though calmer, remained vigilant. She had done what she needed to do, spoken what she had remembered, warned what she had felt, but the echoes of her words had left a mark on everyone in the courtroom. Even as testimony resumed, the tension lingered. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Lawyers adjusted strategies. Jurors whispered among themselves, each aware that the proceedings were now colored by a revelation beyond standard legal evidence. The courtroom had been transformed, subtly but irrevocably, by the insight of one child. And though no one yet fully understood what it meant, everyone felt it. The rules of order, the assumptions of control, the weight of authority, all had been questioned by the instinctive clarity of a 3-year-old girl, holding a stuffed rabbit, repeating 2 words that froze the room and introduced doubt where there had been certainty. The courtroom had fallen into a strange, heavy silence, one that no one could shake. The gavel had called for a recess, but the echo of Lily's small voice, 2 words that had frozen the room, lingered in the minds of every adult present. Bad dog. Simple, clear, unforgettable. Her voice had exposed something no legal testimony, no report, no photograph could explain. Outside the main courtroom, a child specialist approached Lily gently, her presence calm and steady. She had been brought in at the judge's request, a professional experienced in trauma and the behaviors of children who had witnessed or survived danger. Kneeling to bring herself to Lily's level, she spoke softly, her tone deliberate. "Hi, Lily. I'm here to talk to you. You don't have to say anything you don't want to, but can you tell me how you're feeling?" Lily's small hands clutched the rabbit tighter, pressing it against her chin. Her eyes were wide, scanning the room, always returning to the space where the dog had been. She shook her head slowly, unable to articulate the complex emotions inside her. Fear, confusion, memory, swirling together in a way only a child could feel, a language only her body understood. The specialist nodded gently. "That's okay, sweetie. You don't need to talk. Sometimes our bodies remember things our minds can't, and that's important too." For Lily, the memory came in fragments, flashes of light in dark alleys, shadows moving across the walls, voices raised in urgency and panic, and the sudden, startling presence of the dog. She had been small, hidden, and overlooked, but her instincts had absorbed everything. She remembered the fear, the cold, the rush of movement. And she remembered the dog not in terms of law enforcement or obedience, but as a presence, watching, alert, unknowable, impossible to ignore. Her body reacted as if that night were still unfolding. The rabbit pressed against her chest, her fingers digging into its soft fur. Her legs bounced slightly, tension running through every muscle. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. The child specialist recognized all the signs: hypervigilance, fight or flight instinct, unspoken communication through posture and gaze. Lily could not form words yet, but her body was conveying everything adults had missed. Back in the courtroom, murmurs ran through the staff and jurors. Lawyers consulted quietly, debating how to proceed. Officers stood uneasily near the empty space where the dog had been removed. Even Officer Reeves, experienced and confident, felt a strange weight pressing down on him. The dog's actions had been flawless, its obedience unquestioned, but the child's reaction suggested there was more, something subtle yet undeniable, that needed consideration. The judge, after conferring quietly with the specialist, called the courtroom back to order. "We will proceed carefully," he said, voice steady but deliberate. "Certain aspects of the testimony may require reevaluation. We are here to seek the truth." As the courtroom settled, Lily was returned to her seat. Her body remained alert, her eyes scanning, her hands clutching the rabbit. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply observed, her presence quietly commanding attention. The memory of that night, the fear she had survived, the presence of the dog, was encoded in every movement, every glance, every breath. She was not just a spectator, she was a witness in the truest sense, one who remembered without words. Officer Reeves resumed testimony, but this time the room was different. Every word he spoke about the dog's training, precision, and past actions carried an added layer of scrutiny. Jurors whispered to each other. Lawyers exchanged glances. Even the judge, seasoned and composed, felt a tension that could not be measured in legal terms. The narrative of the case had shifted. It was no longer about procedure or presumption. It was about perception, instinct, and memory. Lily's reactions became subtle indicators for everyone in the courtroom. Every twitch of her hand, every shift in her posture, every small intake of breath was noted silently. The child specialist explained that these responses were not random. "She is communicating what she remembers," the specialist whispered. "Children often encode trauma physically. Even when they cannot articulate what happened, their bodies remember. Her fear is not imagined." The murmurs intensified. Lawyers consulted quietly, debating whether to request further investigation into the dog's behavior during the original incident. Officers considered internal reports, scanning every detail for anything they may have overlooked. The jurors were left wondering, could a child's instinct override the confidence of trained professionals? Could two simple words, spoken by someone too young to understand the courtroom, alter the interpretation of evidence? Recollection of the incident came back to Lily in sudden, fragmented bursts. She remembered hiding behind a stack of boxes during the night the dog had been involved in the investigation. Shadows had shifted across the room, voices had risen in panic, and cold air had swept past her hiding spot. The dog had moved nearby, its presence powerful and unwavering, a silent observer of everything unfolding. She remembered feeling both terror and the inexplicable need to pay attention, to survive, to be aware. As the day wore on, the courtroom slowly began to reconsider everything. Evidence that had once seemed straightforward was now filtered through the lens of instinctive perception. Witnesses were revisited. Officers were questioned more carefully. The reliability of procedural assumptions was challenged by a single child's unspoken testimony, encoded in fear and memory rather than words. Even Officer Reeves, observing the process, began to reconsider the dog's role, not in terms of error or failure, but in context. Could the dog's presence, so carefully controlled and trained, have unintentionally contributed to an environment that caused trauma? Could the smallest witness, a child with an intact but visceral memory, reveal what adult eyes and ears had overlooked? The thought weighed heavily on him, a responsibility no procedure manual had ever prepared him for. Lily, still holding her rabbit, remained the focal point of the courtroom without speaking. Her small body transmitted information more clearly than any witness could. Every subtle movement, Every tiny shift of attention told a story. Adults, trained to measure facts, now had to interpret instinct. They had to question their assumptions. They had to listen in a way to the body of a child who had survived and remembered. The judge, recognizing the gravity of the situation, paused proceedings to allow the child specialist to provide insight directly. She spoke gently, addressing the courtroom without interrupting protocol. What you are seeing is not fantasy. Lily's fear is real, tied to experiences she cannot yet articulate. Children encode trauma in ways adults often miss. Her behavior provides critical insight into events you may have assumed were fully understood. This requires careful consideration. A hush fell over the room. The murmurs ceased. Officers, lawyers, and jurors alike realized that the day's proceedings had shifted irrevocably. The child, small and trembling, had brought a dimension of understanding that no procedural expertise could substitute. The courtroom was now faced with a new truth. Perception, instinct, and memory could be as significant as evidence itself. Lily, sensing the change but too young to comprehend it fully, tightened her grip on the rabbit. Her body remained alert, every muscle responsive to the presence of adults and the memory of the dog. Her small voice had already spoken. Now her body was speaking as well. Every subtle gesture was noticed, interpreted, and incorporated into the proceedings. The courtroom, previously confident and orderly, now navigated uncertainty with caution. By the end of the day, it was clear that the case had changed. What had once been considered straightforward was now complex, filtered through the perception of a child who had witnessed events adults thought controlled and understood. Evidence, testimony, and professional experience were no longer enough. The instinct and memory of one small girl had introduced doubt, reevaluation, and a powerful reminder. Sometimes, the truth is carried in ways words cannot capture, and the smallest witness can hold the greatest insight. As the court adjourned for the day, murmurs of discussion followed officers and jurors into the hallways. Lawyers debated the implications. Judges consulted protocols. And Lily, clutching her rabbit, walked quietly beside her aunt, unaware that her instinctive observations had begun to reshape the investigation, challenge assumptions, and demand that adults pay attention to what she had silently known all along. The next morning, the courtroom felt different, charged with a quiet tension that no one could ignore. The usual routine had been broken, and every person present sensed it. The echoes of Lily's words, "bad dog," had not faded overnight. Instead, they had grown heavier, lingering in the minds of officers, jurors, and attorneys alike. Adults trained in logic, procedure, and law were suddenly confronted with something they could not quantify. The instinct of a 3-year-old child who had survived an event that left her memory encoded in fear and perception. The judge entered the room, his presence authoritative yet measured, aware that the previous day's proceedings had shifted the dynamic. He called the courtroom to order, his gavel striking with a tone heavier than usual. "We will proceed," he said, his voice calm, though a subtle tension underscored every word. "Given recent developments, additional testimony and observation will be required to ensure the integrity of this case." The first significant change was the temporary removal of the police dog from the courtroom. Officer Reeves led the German Shepherd quietly to a secure area outside, leash taut but controlled, as murmurs filled the room. Jurors and spectators glanced at the empty space where the dog had been moments ago, the absence almost as palpable as its presence had been. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would come next. Lily remained seated with her aunt, gripping the stuffed rabbit tightly. Her small body was tense, eyes flicking occasionally toward the space where the dog had been. The child specialist was close by, kneeling at her level, speaking softly. "You're safe, Lily. You can watch, you can rest, but we're listening to your memory now in your way." Lily nodded slightly, though her eyes remained wide and alert. Her body remembered. Her instincts never slept. Officer Reeves returned to the witness stand, but the tone of the courtroom had shifted. His usual confidence was now measured, cautious. The prosecutor and defense attorney approached carefully, aware that the previous day's events had introduced doubt into a previously unshakable case. Every statement now carried a new weight. Every move of the officers, every glance from jurors, seemed to be filtered through the memory and perception of a child whose instincts could not be ignored. The judge addressed the courtroom with deliberate clarity. Due to the reactions observed yesterday, the court recognizes that certain elements of the investigation and testimony require re-examination. We will proceed by reviewing key events, with the understanding that witness perception, including that of the child, may influence our understanding of the situation. A hush fell over the room. Even the murmurs of jurors ceased, replaced by a palpable focus. For the first time, everyone in the courtroom began to acknowledge the influence of instinct, memory, and perception, especially from someone whose voice had been dismissed initially. Lily, small and fragile in appearance, had changed the way adults perceived authority and evidence. The defense attorney was the first to act, carefully suggesting the introduction of expert testimony on the dog's behavior during the incident. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "we believe it is necessary to review the dog's actions with additional context, including behavioral observations and environmental factors. The child's reaction cannot be ignored." The judge nodded, acknowledging the validity of the request. "Proceed," he said. "We will ensure that all relevant factors are considered." Jurors whispered quietly among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others visibly unsettled. The courtroom, trained to rely on structured evidence and procedure, was learning to navigate uncertainty. The child's instincts had become a lens through which every detail would now be examined. Officer Reeves resumed his testimony, describing events in detail, but his words were no longer received unquestioningly. Questions from the defense were pointed, deliberate. They asked about the dog's positioning, its attention to peripheral stimuli, and the environment in which it had acted. Every answer was weighed not only against documentation, but also against the undeniable reaction of a small child who had witnessed the event firsthand, through memory and instinct. Lily's behavior continued to guide the courtroom. She did not speak unless prompted, yet her eyes and body conveyed what words could not. A slight lean forward, a subtle shift of her gaze, or the tightening of her grip on the rabbit indicated recognition, caution, or concern. Jurors and attorneys alike noticed these cues, interpreting them with careful attention. The smallest observer had become the most influential. The child specialist provided insight for the adults. Children encode fear and trauma in physical responses. While she cannot articulate everything she experienced, her body remembers. Pay attention to her cues. They are reliable indicators of what she perceived during the incident. The courtroom began to adjust its approach. Officers described the incident again, step by step. Lawyers examined procedural reports, maps, and photographs, juxtaposing them against the observed behavior of Lily. Every subtle movement of the child became evidence in its own right, an unspoken truth that challenged assumptions previously taken for granted. At one point, the defense attorney asked Lily a question, carefully phrased and gentle. "Lily, can you tell us if anything scared you that night?" The girl's small hands tightened around the rabbit. She looked toward the empty space where the dog had been, then down at her lap, trembling. Words did not come, but the tension radiating from her body spoke volumes. Everyone in the courtroom recognized that the memory was active, that instinct was at work, and that truth could not be measured simply by testimony alone. The jurors, watching carefully, began to feel the weight of the child's perception. They whispered quietly among themselves, acknowledging a reality they had not previously considered, that the actions of the dog, while trained and disciplined, had been interpreted differently by someone who had survived the event in a state of heightened awareness. The room's certainty was gone. The scales had shifted. Officer Reeves remained professional but visibly affected. He understood that training and procedure were no longer enough. The child's instincts had forced the courtroom to reconsider every assumption. Even the dog, removed from the room, was now the subject of scrutiny in a new light. What had been considered flawless behavior now required context and interpretation, informed by the memory and perception of a single small witness. By the end of the session, the courtroom had changed fundamentally. Evidence, testimony, and procedure would continue to be analyzed, but the influence of a child's instincts and memory had permanently altered the process. The adults in the room were aware that what they once considered certain was now subject to doubt, revision, and reconsideration. Lily, small and clutching her rabbit, had done what words alone could not. She had forced a room full of trained adults to question assumptions, reinterpret evidence, and recognize the power of instinct. The child's presence had become a guiding force, and even in her silence, she was the center of attention. The judge called for another recess. As the room slowly emptied, murmurs of discussion filled the hallways. Lawyers debated strategy. Officers considered additional reviews. Jurors whispered about the small witness whose instinctive perception had challenged authority and logic. And Lily, holding her rabbit tightly, walked quietly beside her aunt, unaware of the profound effect she had on everyone around her. For the first time, the courtroom had seen the undeniable truth. Sometimes, instinct speaks louder than training, memory weighs heavier than procedure, and the smallest voice can wield the greatest influence. The scales had shifted. The courtroom had never felt so heavy with anticipation. The events of the past days, the silence, the two words, the subtle movements of a 3-year-old girl, had transformed the trial from a standard legal proceeding into something extraordinary. Every person present, from jurors to attorneys, from officers to the judge, felt the weight of uncertainty. What had been routine evidence was now layered with human perception, instinct, and memory that could not be measured in reports or photographs. Lily sat with her aunt, the stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. Her small fingers squeezed the worn fabric, grounding herself as the room's energy pulsed around her. Though she had said so little since the first words, her body remained alert, every movement under scrutiny by the child specialist, the jurors, and even the judge. She did not fully understand why she was important, but instinct told her she was. The German Shepherd, now back in the courtroom under Officer Reeves' careful supervision, moved with precision. Its leash was held firmly, its posture disciplined. Yet the tension in the room had changed the dynamic. The dog's presence, once a symbol of control, now carried layers of interpretation it had never faced before. Eyes scanned it, whispers lingered around its actions, and every step it took was observed for subtle cues. The judge spoke first, his voice calm but resonant with authority. "We are reconvening to review the final evidence and testimonies," he said, glancing over the courtroom. "Given recent developments, the court acknowledges the importance of considering all perspectives, including those informed by instinct and observation." He paused, letting the words settle. "This includes the testimony of the child witness, whose insights may prove critical in understanding the events in question." The room went quiet. Even seasoned officers felt a twinge of unease. This was not a moment for procedure or habit. It was a moment to confront truth in its most raw and instinctive form. The child specialist was called to speak. Kneeling beside Lily, she addressed the court. "Lily has provided a rare insight," she began, voice measured and calm. "Her reactions are not imagination. They are memory encoded in fear, observed through physical and behavioral responses. Children perceive events differently than adults. Her instincts are alert to danger, even when no adult perceives it. The significance of her reactions must be weighed carefully, as they reveal truths otherwise invisible to standard observation." The courtroom absorbed the weight of her words. Jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes, whispering questions, their assumptions challenged. Lawyers consulted quietly, their strategies adapting to the new reality. Officer Reeves adjusted his stance, realizing that the dog's flawless record was now viewed through a new lens, the perspective of someone who had survived and remembered in ways adults could not fully quantify. Lily, guided by the specialist, was asked to indicate certain areas in the courtroom during her memory recollection. She did not speak at first, but her small hand pointed toward corners, slight shifts in space, and areas that corresponded with her encoded memory. The jurors observed carefully, noting how a child who had been hidden during the incident seemed to convey knowledge no adult had considered. The defense attorney spoke next, carefully framing questions and observations to the court. We request that the jury consider not only the procedural record, but also the behavioral and instinctive evidence provided today. The child's responses indicate that while the dog's actions were trained, there may have been unintended consequences during the incident in question. This must inform your judgment. Even Officer Reeves, standing by the German Shepherd, nodded slightly. His experience told him the dog had acted perfectly according to training, but now he realized that perfect was not enough. The child's perception had revealed a dimension that procedural evaluation alone could not account for, a subtle, real, human impact of events unfolding around her. As testimony concluded, the judge addressed the jury. "Members of the jury," he said, voice steady, "you have witnessed testimony, evidence, and observations, including those provided by a child witness. It is your duty to weigh all aspects carefully. Consider procedural facts, behavioral insights, and instinctive observations. The truth of the case may not be confined to documents or adult recollection alone. It may reside in perception, memory, and instinct as well." The jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom felt unusually silent. Adults whispered softly among themselves, officers exchanged uncertain glances, and even the dog lay quietly, sensing the charged atmosphere. Everyone understood that this trial had transcended routine procedure. It was now a study in perception, instinct, and the extraordinary impact of one small voice. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The judge called the courtroom to order, his gavel striking with measured authority. All eyes turned forward as the foreperson stood. The room held its collective breath. Even Lily, small and trembling, sensed the weight of the moment. Her aunt held her close, whispering quiet encouragement, though neither could predict the outcome. The foreperson spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Your Honor, after reviewing all evidence, testimony, and observations, including those provided by the child witness, the jury has reached a conclusion. While the dog performed according to training, the jury acknowledges the significance of the child's perception. Her instinctive response revealed a reality that requires caution and adjustment in evaluating similar situations." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jurors had done more than weigh evidence. They had recognized the power of instinct, the authority of perception, and the truth encoded in a small child's memory. It was a verdict not only about events, but about understanding, human insight, and the limits of procedural certainty. The judge nodded solemnly. "The court acknowledges the jury's findings," he said. "This case highlights the importance of considering all facets of evidence, including those informed by perception, instinct, and memory. The record will reflect the jury's recognition of these factors, and the court will issue appropriate guidance regarding the implications for future proceedings involving similar circumstances." As the courtroom emptied, whispers and reflections continued. Officers discussed training adjustments. Lawyers debated procedural changes. Jurors reflected on the profound role of instinct in determining truth. And Lily, small and clutching her rabbit, walked quietly beside her aunt, unaware of the full extent of her influence. Outside the courtroom, the German Shepherd rested, still and calm. Its handler, Officer Reeves, knelt to scratch behind its ears. "Good job, buddy," he murmured. Yet he understood that the dog's training, discipline, and obedience were now viewed through a different lens. One shaped not only by procedure, but by perception, instinct, and the courage of a small child who had spoken 2 words that changed everything. Lily's aunt hugged her tightly. "You were so brave," she whispered, pressing her face to the child's hair. Lily looked up, small eyes wide, unsure why everyone seemed to praise her. She only knew that she had done what felt right. What her body remembered, what her instincts had demanded. Her 2 words had frozen the courtroom, shifted perspective, and reminded adults that truth is not always measured by documents or testimony alone. Months later, the case would be cited as a turning point in considering behavioral evidence, especially in incidents involving children. Officer Reeves would advocate for enhanced training that incorporated understanding of perception and instinct, emphasizing the human element alongside procedural precision. And the courtroom would remember the day a 3-year-old girl, clutching a rabbit and speaking 2 words, had revealed a truth no adult could have seen otherwise. Lily, unaware of the historical significance, continued to grow, carrying her instincts, her courage, and her sharp perception into every corner of her life. The courtroom never forgot her. Jurors, officers, and lawyers carried the lesson forward. Sometimes, the smallest voice carries the heaviest weight, and instinct can illuminate what experience and training alone cannot reveal. The German Shepherd, disciplined and obedient, remained a valued partner in law enforcement. But the day's events had reminded everyone that even the most trained and reliable forces must be understood in context. And that context could be revealed in the unlikeliest of ways, through the fear, memory, and courage of a 3-year-old girl. The courtroom returned to its routine, but nothing would ever feel the same. Every adult who had been present carried with them a quiet, profound respect for instinct, for perception, and for the small witness who had spoken 2 words, and in doing so had taught the greatest lesson of all, that truth is not always loud, formal, or procedural. Sometimes it is soft, instinctive, and undeniable. And sometimes it comes from the smallest, most unlikely source imaginable.